Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to today's digital marketing class. Sorry, I was in a digital marketing class, marketing research class. Trail of thought there. So I'm currently sharing the screen as well. And if you can also use a textbook for reference. We are on page, we're on chapter 10, designing the sample plan. And let's quickly reference the page there. That should be page 211, page 211. You'll remember that we also follow our marketing class, or marketing research class, using the proposal guidelines, which are on Brightspace. So from time to time, I'll always be referring to the research proposal guidelines that we are following, which you will need to also apply when you do a research proposal or you write a research proposal. So just a quick reminder, if you go to Brightspace and you go to marketing research module or page, and you can download basically the research proposal guidelines. Under practical guide, quickly gonna save them here on desktop. We're using different computers from time to time, so I already have it somewhere. So you'll remember these guidelines for research proposal, starting with the introduction, research problem objectives, research design. We've covered research design in chapter 5, and then data collection. That was chapter 6 to 8. The last time we had an online class, we covered the questionnaire design, which is part of data collection. So today we'll be covering the sampling plan, which is number 5 on the guidelines, and how you actually draft the sampling plan. So let's quickly go to the detailed guidelines. So our sampling plan will be here. So I will be editing this document so that you can see the practicality of how we do that. Yesterday, I've also sent an email with class activities that we'll be doing today. So if you actually, you're supposed to have read that class activity by now. So we're gonna quickly download that class activity. So if you haven't, you'll need to download it. You'll be working on these class activities to understand the practicality of chapter 10, the sampling design. So you'll see the learning activity 10. It's associated on WhatsApp there. The case study is about student daily TV schedule. So we'll be using this case study and answering question 1, which will be based on that content we'll be discussing just now, or the theory. So in this project, students daily TV schedule, you will see that it was about multi-choice, which you instructed you to interview 500 students around Tshwane in Gauteng before March 2020. We will change that to before March 2021 or to December 2021 because we've already elapsed this time. You need to interview students face-to-face by visiting them at various higher institutions. So you see here, they instruct you that it must be face-to-face, which means it must be personal interviews. They also indicate that there's no list that contain their names or contact details was provided, meaning that we don't have an ITS list that we can use maybe to send them the survey or to call them. Hence, we must use personal interviews. It was suggested to use a sampling method that will save traveling cost, collect data quickly, allows you to draw a sample from accessible respondents, and you must recruit interviewers to assist you with data collection, and they must speak English and one of the African languages, be students. And then you will see that the research project that we are conducting is to actually determine which TV channels students watch on a daily basis. So our project that we'll be looking at is the preferred TV channels for students. And we'll be designing a sampling plan for that. So let's take this as our research objective and have it, because it's important to always have a research objective or your title at top of the page of what you are dealing with. So we're gonna put it here under sampling plan. So if we paste that there, so it will be our quick reference. This will be our primary research objective. To determine TV channels watched by students on daily basis. Okay, so if you look into the content of the PowerPoint slides starting on the page, designing the sampling plan, you will see they start by actually indicating the learning outcomes. And then these learning outcomes are also showed on the study guide. So in this chapter, we will differentiate or distinguish between the concepts of sampling as well as a census, the difference there. Most of our time we're going to spend in this learning unit will be discussing the steps that are followed in sampling process. And looking into these steps, we have to indicate whether we'll be using probability or non-probability sampling. The sample size is also part of the steps. So in other words, we'll just be looking at the first learning outcome and the second learning outcome, and we'll be able to cover the overall objectives of the chapter. So let's start by differentiating between a population and a sample. In the textbook, you will see they start giving you that discussion or that definition of your population on page 212. And when you look down page 212, it's in that paragraph under sampling. So you'll have to highlight those definitions. We've got 3 definitions we'll be looking into. Under that box written, a sample is defined. Where they define a sample, they also define a population, so you can highlight both there. So when you conduct marketing research, we will have a group of people that we require information from. So these are people or individuals which qualifies to be part of the survey, in other words. So anyone who qualifies to actually participate in a survey becomes part of the population. For example, could be conducting a research about TUT students, and every student who's registered becomes a population. Or we'll be conducting research about Pick and Pay stores, and we're looking in terms of the behavior of their customers, and everyone who's a Pick and Pay customer, it becomes a population. So in simple ways, population is a total group of people from whom the information is required. It doesn't mean that we will be able to interview everyone here. For example, if all TUT students, our research is about TUT students, we won't be able to interview every student. So if we decide to interview 10% of TUT registered students, we are talking about a sample. So that's the difference between a population and a sample. When you read the definition as well in the textbook on page 212, it talks about a sample being a subset of a population. So you must understand what is a population first before you actually can be able to indicate the sample of that population. So a population is anyone who qualifies. And then from everyone who have qualified, those who we are going to interview. Remember, we won't be able to interview everyone. Those who we are going to interview are the ones which we refer to them as a sample. So in our study, if we choose to interview maybe only third-year marketing students, that will be our sample. And then we generalize our results to all TUT students. Remember, we require information from TUT students, and we decide to interview only third-year marketing students. And that becomes our sample, the ones that we have interviewed. So the difference again, population, we need information from certain individuals, and those individuals are a population of the study. Those who we were able to interview or we intend to interview, for example, we're only going to interview third years or those who are actually athletes or any group, those who are using NSFAS or those who are using TUT bus, specifically the ones that we could get our research survey to, and they were able to complete the questionnaire, becomes part of the sample. In case of Pick and Pay customers, because we are actually requiring Pick and Pay customers or information from Pick and Pay customers, if we decide to interview only smart shoppers, for example, we send them a link or an email, and then they complete a survey, that will be our sample. We interviewed smart shoppers, and our group where we need information with everyone who shops at Pick and Pay. Lastly, you've got another example of household in the city of Tshwane there. And then our interest maybe will be only those who are residing in Soshanguve, or we interview only those who live in Soshanguve. So that becomes our sample. And then we generalize our results, what we find. And then we indicate that household in the city of Tshwane are based on the results from actually the sample of 400 respondents. And then the question always comes, we ask whether, why should a researcher design a sampling plan? So there are specific reasons, and you can highlight in the textbook there. That will be on page 213. And now on page 213, you will see there are 4 bullets there indicating why should you use a sample. So in general, when you look at the difference between population and a sample, we ask ourselves, when we want true or valid information, should we interview everyone? For example, who qualifies in case we wanted true results about TUT? Should we interview every student who is actually a TUT student or registered, or should we invite a certain group or a small group like 30 years? Which one will give us more valid data? Which one will give us more actually appropriate data for the study? In most cases, we think that if we interview everyone, that will give us a true population or true results or true findings. But the textbooks or the guidelines in marketing research differs. They indicate that if you interview a sample, that's when you get more accurate results than when you interview a population. So there is other specific reasons why a sample is mostly preferred. So those reasons, basically, you will see there on page 213. It talks about a census versus a sample. Just before those reasons on page 212 at the bottom. So if we have a population, remember our population is the people who qualifies to be interviewed. Those who we interviewed becomes our sample if you don't interview everyone. But at some stage you can interview everyone. So if you are able to do interviews on each and every person that qualifies, you've conducted a census instead of a sample. That's the difference that we get between a sampling and the census. A sample is a subset of a population, whereas a census is a process of obtaining data from the whole population. For example, we've got South African census that are usually conducted every 10 years. And then those South African census information, they give enough background about South African demographics, which languages speak the most. But what they aim to do, they aim to interview every South African citizen, and that's why it's called as a country census, because that's where you interview everyone who qualifies to be part of the sample there. Another example that the slide is referring to are the TUT lecture evaluations. Usually when you conduct TUT lecture evaluations, a lecture will be scored by a student or rated by students, but who qualifies to rate the lecture is basically the students that are taught by the lecture. And we usually don't only select a specific number of students that they should complete those lecture evaluations. We aim that every student that qualifies should be actually be part of the respondents and complete the questionnaire. And that is a census in a way, because we are aiming to interview everyone who qualifies or who is part of the population. So that's the differences between the three terms that are used here. A population, followed by sample, followed by census. So you should be able to understand the differences and be able to indicate whether we're going to use a census in this study or we're going to use a sample to collect data from the population. So coming back to the reasons why we prefer a sample instead of a census, why should we interview only a small number or a certain number of respondents and base their response to the whole population is because firstly, we get more accurate results from a sample. When we interview only 1,000 registered TUT students, we're gonna get more accurate results than when we interview everyone who is a TUT registered student. There is a reasons for that, and you should highlight on page 213. That will be the first bullet, where they tell you that the reason is because of the quality of data that you will collect there. So what they are actually explaining there is that if you have to collect data from every TUT student that is registered or from a census, you will need more interviewers. And then those interviewers are different. They ask different questions. They approach respondents differently. You have more higher chance of interviewers fabricating answers. So at the end of the day, you won't get consistent data. Remember, if I have to interview only 1,000 people, that is more practical, like it says as bullet number 4. That is easy to do. That is doable. The word practical means doable. So in other words, it can be done. Maybe in 2 weeks, I can only hire 10 interviewers. We can train these 10 interviewers how to collect data, which means our data will be accurate. But if we interview a lot of people, everyone who qualifies, we will hire more interviewers, which will lead to our data being not accurate. So that's the reason a sample is provide more accurate data than a census. The second and the third reason are basically straightforward. It takes less time to interview less people. It costs less to interview less people. So let's start with the steps in the designing of a sampling process, which you should understand and be able to do them practically. And then this step starts on page 216. It's step 1 to step 6. And once you understand all these steps, we take these steps and we apply them in the marketing research proposal guidelines. So starting with step 1, we start by defining the population. Remember, a population, we already have a definition of what the population means. And if everyone who qualifies to be part of the research product is a population, or bargaining power mean? It means that the supplier can force you, the manufacturer. Are we having a different class for marketing as well? Because I see on WhatsApp we are having that conversation as well. Can you guys clarify for me as well? Yes, Stephanie.
I don't really know what's happening, but they just announced that we have a class right now for marketing. So I'm a bit confused.
No. The marketing class that's attending today is not our group. Our group is only on Thursday and Friday, I think.
Yes.
So today is not our group. Yeah. So people are.
Oh, there's that confusion because we've got 3 different groups, and
Yes.
now I'm only seeing the group that is indicated here, NDMKF0. So if you qualify to be as a group as is indicated here, then you're part of my group. So that class is for another group. So I think that's clear. Thank you for that. So if we continue here and look in terms of defining the population, remember we need these steps and do them practically. So when you put them in a research proposal, you don't have to or necessarily have to define or explain what's the meaning of these steps. You only indicate the practicality. So you provide practical examples only. So we'll be using practical example of that case study which I sent, which you should be having opened, learning activity 10, which was sent on WhatsApp and as email yesterday as well. So let's start by step 1. It says there, if you read on page 216, you can highlight the first sentence there defining the population at the bottom of the page. The total group of people whom the information is required, remember, everyone who qualifies to be part of the study becomes a population. Clearly defined population specifies the following: the sampling unit, sample element, the extent, and time. So when you define the population, you must have these 4 aspects. And then it's the sampling. If you look at the activity that we have here, we are basically answering question 1.1, develop a sampling plan for multi-choice, motivate all answers. You'll see it's 15 marks, that question. So the first 4 marks will come from that step. So if we quickly paste that step 1 here, and then step 1, and then we indicate, define the population like the textbook indicates there. Define the population like I've indicated here. You don't necessarily need to discuss or elaborate or explain what is the population we are interested in, the practicality only, you will see they said we must indicate the sample unit, that's the first one, and then followed by sample element, the extent as well as time. So let's look into these four aspects into details before we provide practical answers. So what you see there on the slide, on page 215, you can also highlight, you've got the definitions of what is a sample unit and what is a sample element, but that definition is not so much clearer. So what you need to read the whole definition and highlight the words that make sense to you. So I've done that part for you on the slide. Look, starting with the sample unit. Oh, let's quickly talk about the sample unit. Sample unit, it refers to where are we going to find the respondents, where else the sample element refers to who are we going to interview. So I love to use the words who and where to define these two because they make it much easier to understand. So you will see sample unit is where, and then the slide will show you an example about the case study we've done in the beginning of the year about alcohol consumers. So remember, sample unit, you can also write with a pen or a pencil there on page 216 under step 1, where it says sample unit. It's on page 217, second paragraph, they talk more about it there. And then you can just write where, because it will always indicate, help you to find those, the source or the unit to find the respondents. Sample element is the second one. That's where you indicate who you are going to interview. In the textbook, you also want to highlight that definition on table 10.1. So if you go back to page 215 in the textbook, you want to highlight the definitions about sample element as well as a sample unit, or to tick them there. So if we read our case study that we have about students here, first of all, we already know they've indicated here we need to interview 500 students around Swane. You need to interview students face to face because there is no contact details. So we can start answering basically our sampling plan. Remember, our sample unit is where we're going to find them. I always love to start by answering a sample element because it's easy to picture who are you going to interview, followed by where I'm going to find that person, rather than starting with where am I going to find this person, who am I going to interview. So starting with the sample element, remember this is the who part, and then the sample unit is the where part. So it said students. Try by all means to at least include 3 words or 3 terms followed by brackets when you provide practical answers. We move from general to specific most of the time. That is the idea. When you say you move from general to specific, I mean that you are saying students, if you want to be more specific, these are registered at universities, because we've got more than that. Students registered at universities, you can be more even specific. They must have a DSTV account because we will be asking them which channels they want. So at least 3, and then it's as specific as possible. Or we can change that and say in higher education. Because the case study set in higher education, and now when we say it in universities, we are actually discriminating with the other ones at colleges, which are still in higher education as well. But let's just quickly confirm it said higher education. Oh yeah, they said higher education, so we will use those terms as well. Where are we going to find these students? So basically, they said we must interview them face to face. So it will be around Tshwane. So basically, we're gonna find them at campuses. And we try to be more specific from here. In Pretoria, for example, we can say at TUT Pretoria West, but even in Soshanguve, TUT campuses, UP campuses. Let's put one college, maybe TNC, Tshwane North College, and UNISA maybe, and put one of the traditional universities. They said we should visit them, so you must be as specific as possible here. And you can see some of these answers like your TUT, your UP, University of Pretoria. It's always nice not to abbreviate and use the complete word because you don't know who you're writing this research proposal to. If that will be university. So I also wanna do this as practical as possible so that you do it as correct as possible in your assessment. Tshwane University of Technology, University of Pretoria. Like I've indicated, you don't know your target audience at this time because you are writing a research proposal. You are aiming to present this research proposal to multi-choice. You're not sure who's going to read that. Does they know what TT stand for or UP stand for? So instead of abbreviations, you try to include the full words there. And if you look into the third one, the extent, it's included in that paragraph on page 217, the meaning of what is an extent. Towards the end of that paragraph there, 217, sorry. And now when you read about the extent it refers to the geographic area where will these interviewers be conducted and the time. We must be specific about the time. Remember, when you write the research proposal in the beginning of your research proposal under introduction, you'll also include the month and the year when the research proposal was prepared. For example, if you are doing a research proposal today, you will indicate the date, which is today, which will be 24 August 2021. That will be in the beginning of the overall research proposal. So referring to the slides here, this is where you'll be referring to that date here. In the introduction, every time you write a research proposal, you don't write future date here. I've seen some of you are writing future date or the date that is in the case study. You can completely ignore all that information given in the case study when you write the date here, because the date here is asking when was this research proposal written, and you basically indicate the date of specific date of that month or at that particular place when you are doing a research proposal. But the one that you see that we are doing in under the sampling plan is a different date, this one. So the date here is about, remember, sampling plan is about data collection. It's asking you when are you going to collect data. So all the answers we include here about data collection. We're gonna go to Tswana University of Technology, to UP. We're gonna look into registered students in higher education, ask them to complete a questionnaire. And then the geographic area, the extent, if we include that, they said it must be under city of Tshwane. We try to move from specific here to general. So city of Tshwane is in Gauteng and that is in South Africa. So when will the data be collected? So here you try by all means to give it at least 3 months from the date you are preparing a research proposal. And you must indicate that date in form of a period showing you how long it will take you to collect data. So once again, 3 months, it's a minimum. Why we say 3 months? Because in these 3 months, you wanna try by all means to design a questionnaire, to conduct secondary data and be ready. So it can be more than 3 months, but at least it must be 3 months. You cannot propose that you'll be collecting data next week while you are preparing a research proposal today. So at least 3 months. So today is August. So in other words, we can say, and the date that you use here that you're gonna suggest, it must also be aligned with the date that you're gonna use in your time and financial schedule. So once you come to collecting primary data, you take that date there, you use that date as well, so in your schedule, because this is about when are you going to collect data. So if we were doing this research proposal today, we can propose that we can be done by end of this year. And let's say on the 1st of January, 2022, we can collect data. Give yourself enough time to collect data. There is many things that can go through, so give yourself at least a month, depending also on the sample size, but usually it will be a month to collect your data. It can be less at some stages, but remember this is a proposal, we want to plan ahead. So let's give it ourselves a month from 1 till the 30th of January. Remember, it must be shown as a period, meaning that you indicate how long do we have. This is 4 weeks to collect primary data. And you're done with step 1. So if we move on to step 2, you will see in the slide, step 2, it's about identifying the sample frame. And if you read on page 218, that's where you've got the discussion of identifying a sampling frame. They define for you what is a sampling frame there. But a sampling frame in simple terms is a list. Any list or any file record, any document with data, it could be an Excel spreadsheet, as long as it contains the details of our respondents, the details of who are we going to interview. For example, it could be the contact numbers and their names. It could be the maps, street maps, like it says there. It could also be their description. But if we can be listed in from 1 to say this is respondent 1, this is respondent 2, this is respondent 3, and then respondent 1, his name is what, these are his contact details. That will be a perfect sampling frame, a list. If we are conducting this research at TUT and it's about TUT students, I can go to building 21, our admin department, and I can ask them to provide me with an ITS list, or I can quickly download it on ITS, which shows every student that is registered at TUT. And then that list, I can use it as a sampling frame to select the ones that I'm going to interview. So the question is always whether you have a sampling frame or you do not have a list. So the question is always whether that list is available or is not available. If that list is available, you indicate that we have a list, and then you indicate the source of that list. For example, the source could be ITS records, that source could be yellow pages, that source could be provided by the company showing their contact details. However, if that list is not available, you provide a description. It's important that if the list is not available, you indicate that list is not available, description will be used. So what is the description? Description, that's where you describe your respondents. Who are they? For example, how many years are they? Are they females or males? We don't have a list, but when you describe them and you provide a description, it becomes easier for us to say our sample frame is these people because they have these characteristics. So looking into these two differences, some examples that are shown on the slide, this could be about Pick and Pay, the list of smart shopper, contact details, that will be their sampling frame. It could also be a telephone directory of customers who pay electricity bills if we are conducting this in the city of Tshwane, and then we have their telephone directory, and then we can use that list and select the individuals from that list. In that list, it's important to note some shortcomings of the sample frames. This is not something you will discuss or do it practically, but it's something that you should know that before you use a list, you should evaluate that list for certain requirement or if that list does not have any shortcomings. Some of them could be missing sampling elements or sampling units, meaning that some people qualify to be part of the study, but they are not on that list, which means that list is not complete. Duplicate entries, people who have their names repeating more than once, they have more chance of being selected. That is unfair. Or it can include foreign elements, meaning that people on the list, they don't belong to the study or they're not qualified to be part of the study, but they are in that study. So they should be removed from the list. It's important to know how you deal with these shortcomings. For example, the first one, those who are missing, we need to add them. Duplicate entries, we need to delete them. Foreign elements, we need to remove them. So doing this practically, step 2 of our sampling design will be specify sampling frame. This one is worth 2 marks, this step. And in this step, firstly, you must indicate whether it's a list or a description. And you get 1 mark for that and you provide motivation. So let's look into our case study. It was indicated that no list of that contain names or contact details of students has been provided, meaning that we must use a description. So we're gonna use this motivation. So we've already identified that we're gonna use a description instead of a list, hence I delete the list there. And we motivate by using what is included in the case study. Try by all means when you write your answers, you avoid that person. You must be specific. Who are they? So we'll indicate students here. No list that contains students' names or contact details was provided. The next step is to provide, remember this is just 1 mark, is to provide that description. So since we don't have a list, how are we going to identify these people? The nice thing about this part is that you've already done it in step 1. That is your sample unit and your sample element. So basically you must include it here that we don't have the list of contact details, but we will go to these campuses. We will ask them if they are registered, they watch TV, and then these are the people that we interview. Moving from general to specific about higher education institutions, once again, remember, where are we going to find students to interview at those campuses? So you can also be more specific and say we're going to go to cafeteria, for example, or we're going to interview them at bus stops or in class. And then you can also just take that information that you have there and summarize it into a sentence and provide it as a description here. Higher education campuses such as TUT, UNISA. So we write it as a proposal. Will be contacted. Remember, this was part of the ethics about access. Will be contacted to request permission. Interviewers maybe will meet respondents, just making it as a sentence. At cafeteria. Remember, we don't have a list, so we must become as clear as possible how we're going to contact these institutions or how we're going to find these students and interview them. And we can indicate and only those who are registered for that academic year and watches this year's TV. Complete the questionnaire. Obviously, you can do this shorter or in fewer words than how it's written here, but just try and include as much as practicality as possible, meaning that we should know who, where, the sample unit and the sample element must be included in the description. And you're done with that step. So looking into the next step, which is step 3. Let's do it on the next page, this one. This step is worth 4 marks. And if you go back to the PowerPoint slide, in this step, we select the sampling method. So when you select the sampling method, you've got 2 categories. You can choose between probability sampling versus non-probability sampling. So we already know here that our step is about select sampling methods. And then there are 2 things that are actually done under this step. The first one, obviously, they said you should indicate whether we're using probability or non-probability sampling. We must understand the theory or the difference between these two before we select which one are we going to use. And then the second thing, we select the method. So if you look on page 220, you've got selecting the sampling methods as a step there. You can highlight that first word there in that paragraph. Sampling methods can be divided into 2 major categories, probability and non-probability. If we look under the slides, how do we define or how do we actually explain this step? First of all, you must understand the word probability, what it means, because you will see it's repeating here. And once you understand the word probability, it becomes much easier. The word probability, if you look at synonyms or how it's used, it means a chance. So the question that we are asking here, it's about the chance of respondents being selected to participate. So if we use the word probability in other sentences, we can, for example, say, what is the probability that it will rain today? And then a person maybe will say 50%. It's the same thing as like asking, what is the chance that it might rain today? Or it could be, what is the probability that you can win lotto if you bet certain numbers? And then they will tell you that you've got these odds to win. And that is the meaning of the word probability. So we've got respondents, which we refer to them as population. They qualify to be part of the survey. In this case, our case study is about students. Everyone who is a student is registered and is actually watching DSTV. It's our population, but we're not going to interview all the students. So how are we going to select those students? Do those students have an equal chance? The most important word here is an equal or not equal. Probability means that respondents have an equal chance, like as defined on page 220. You can highlight there as well. They talk about it there. Non-probability means that respondents do not have an equal chance. What does this mean? It simply means that if I say we have an equal chance, it means that all of us as students, we can be selected or we cannot be selected. But if it's non-probability, we don't have an equal chance. They can select the respondent and say, we're only looking for students who are taller. It means that we don't have an equal chance. Or we're looking for students who are athletics. All of us are registered, but you're only looking for athletics. Then we don't have an equal chance if that's the case. So it could also be a situation whereby interviewers themselves, they select students, which means they will approach the ones that they look friendly or they look approachable. That could be based on physical attributes, that they look nicer to approach, and then they will avoid people that they seems like they don't like them. So that is not an equal chance to participate. So how do we draw a line to say these respondents have an equal chance, these ones do not have an equal chance? This one will depend on step 2, which you are identifying the sampling frame. So if you have a list of respondents, for example, they belong in that ITS list from 1 to 30,000, they are registered, you will use probability. So every time you have a list, you've identified on step 2 that you have a list, you choose probability because it means that we are going to use a list to select the respondents. And if we are using a list, everyone will have an equal chance because in the list, you can simply say we're going to select every person who appears number 100. Anyone can be appearing number 100, and that was an equal chance. We did not discriminate. If you don't have a list, it means we're going to use our own judgment to select the respondents. We look at the respondents, or it's because we're at that particular period, at that particular time. That is non-probability. So every time your research does not have a list of respondent details, you use non-probability. In this case, we already know we don't have a list, hence I delete probability. Then we're going to use non-probability because we don't have a list to select the respondents, meaning that they will not have an equal chance. So we must motivate this answer, why we chose non-probability. So once again, you will see that everything that you do on a previous step leads you to the next step. So we've already indicated here, because there is no list that contains students' details was provided, we just need to build up from that definition. That's why we say non-probability. No list that contains students' names or contact details was provided. Therefore, students will not have an equal chance of being selected. And if you look in that diagram on page 221, you've got different types of sampling methods there. Starting with non-probability. This is whereby they don't have an equal chance, meaning that we don't have a list. You can also write with a pen or a pencil in your textbook there. Non-probability, you indicate then that will be no list. Probability, we have a list. We're gonna summarize. We've got the total of 8 steps here, but to summarize them, they're divided into 4. Probability sampling. Remember, we have a list here. Under probability sampling, we can use simple random, you can use systematic. Simple random, it's like a dice, throwing a dice, it gives you a number. So it's just a simple process. Or how they choose lotto. Remember when they choose lotto numbers, they are using a sampling process there. It could be any number and all of those numbers have an equal chance. So we will talk more about those two, simple random and systematic. They require a list. Because any number that you're going to get here, you're going to take that number and compare it to a list to select a respondent. So if you don't have a list, it will be useless to do that. Cluster sampling. This is whereby you have a list, but this list of individuals is divided into categories. So you also need to highlight there about where they talk about cluster sampling. That will be on page 229, stratified sampling and cluster sampling there. And then on page 230, what you want to highlight are those 2 bullets there, where they say the population is heterogeneously, which means it's different and can be divided into stratas. This is, for example, at TUT, we will have a list, but this list is divided to say these are marketing students, these are engineering students, these are postgraduates, these are undergraduates. You see, we've got more categories, which means we are using clusters or we are using stratas then. So that's the difference. So depending on the type of the list that you have, you can, if it's just a generic list, you can use between the two, simple, random, and systematic. And then if it's divided into further categories, then you can use clusters as well as stratified. So let's look into this systematic process as well as the simple random process, meaning that we will be having a list. How does it work? Because this is where you'll have to do calculations. And now, if you look into the class exercise that we are doing, so we'll be answering question 1.2, because that's where they tell you about use a systematic as well as use a simple random sampling there. So we're going to answer those questions practically there. So looking into the slide, firstly, they start about simple random process. How does it work? A simple random process, it consists of those 4 steps there. Remember, you'll be having the list. So the first thing that you want to do on that list, you want to number the elements of the population sequentially from 1 to n. So let me show you practically how do you do this as well. I'm going to do it on a different page because you don't want to include this as part of the sampling process. It's a separate activity. So this will be our simple process, simple random. And we ask this question, obviously, as a separate question most of the time, like it's asked in that learning activity, meaning that you will see it's worth 15 marks or 10 marks. So you should know exactly what you do under each step here. Firstly, here, sometimes they indicate all steps. Where they say indicate all steps, the first thing is you must indicate the steps as they are. And then you provide practicality under each steps. What did you do? So the first thing that they indicated here is that we must number the elements of the population sequentially from 1 to n, which means that is a capital letter N, meaning that our population where it ends. So looking into the case study that we have about students, multi-choice, they said we must interview 500 students around Tshwane. But in this case, we do not have a list. Let's look at question 1.2. They say multi-choice has provided you with a list containing 10,000 registered students, meaning that if multi-choice was able to obtain to have this list, our list will look something similar to this. I just want to show you so that you understand as well what exactly we have and what are we doing. Our list maybe will have something such as a respondent, maybe saying names, saying contact details. And then they said this list, it moves from 1 up until 10,000. So if this list was going down all the way up until 10,000, we will have those details there indicating the details of our respondents. That number 1, this is their name, this is their contact details, like that, up until 10,000, which means in our list we've got how many people? 10,000, but we're only gonna select 500 from this 10,000. So now in step 1, they said we must number the elements of the population sequentially from person number 1. So when you do this practically, you will say the list will go from 1 up until n. This n stands for the last number on the list. So looking at the question, it said, the question here said the list, it contains 10,000 registered students. So it will move from 1 to 10,000 like I've drafted here in Excel, meaning it will be 1 all the way to 10,000. And you are done with that part. Move on to the next one. So if your list is 500 people, then it will be 1 to 500, depending on how far is your list or how long is your list, like it indicates here. So I'm going to close that. Use the number, that is step number 2. In the textbook, you also want to highlight these steps as well. So in the textbook, you will see all these steps. They are indicated on page 225. On page 226, they are more highlighted nicely. So you can highlight on page 226 there at the bottom, at those 4 bullets. The following are such as steps for drawing a simple random process. So on step 2, it says we must use the number of figures. Use the number of figures in a table that correspond with the number of figures in population. So this N stands for population. I just want to indicate somewhere there so that you always know that. A small n in this step stands for sample, where else a capital letter or uppercase stand for our population. So we'll just keep this somewhere here. Our population, everyone who's in the list, hence we use 10,000. So now, the question that we ask on this step number 2 is how many figures, how many numbers are in that 10,000? Remember, it's a uppercase, which means we see 5 numbers here. So we will be using 5 numbers in a table. So we must indicate how many numbers. That will be 5 digits. So if your list was continuing or it was only 1,000, you'll have 4 digits, meaning that you'll be selecting respondents based on 4 digits. So you always use the last person on the list or how far you can select the respondents as your figure end. So number 2 here, instruction was given that our list contains 10,000 students, hence we use 5 digits based on that 10,000 has 5 digits. You must indicate this part. This is a practicality, whether it's 4 digits, whether it's 5 digits, because you will see it will help us to actually select the respondents using this process. Determine the starting point in the table. This instruction will always be given. You must indicate it, the practicality of it. So looking at our question, will always give us the starting point. They said the starting point within the sample interval is number 12. Can you see that? And that is given to us. Sorry, I should be following this one. So starting point, it's given here. It says starting point is a 7 digit in the first row. So remember, we've got row here, we've got digits. So that's the first 6. The 7 digits starts here, which is those are the 4, 6, 5, 1. Remember, I'm using 5 digits to select. Hence, I've highlighted those 5 digits. So let's first copy the starting point and put it here, practicality. Our starting point becomes 7 digit in the first row, which is equals to we must take those 5 digits or those numbers. So if you copy them in the table, that is 46513. That's where we're gonna start. You must also indicate this part. At some stage, I saw students not indicating what is their starting point. You don't wanna lose marks. And then now you can start selecting the respondents in that list using this process. So when you determine the starting point, you must also indicate how you're gonna move. So in this case, we always move from left to right using our eyes. There are other methods like using top to down. Some of these examples are shown on page 227, but we'll always use from left to right like we are doing now. So in this case, if we open this table, we'll be moving from left to right. 4651. So if we take that number, I'm going to quickly take all these numbers. Come easier. And then we can select the respondents here. They said we should select the first 5. So we will say respondent 1, respondent 2, up until 5. So if you look in that table, we select 5 numbers because 5 numbers at least will give us up until 10,000. If you select number less than 5 and use 4 numbers, you will see that it was going to give you situations whereby all your numbers are less than 1,000 because that is 4 numbers. So you must always use the number that matches the capital letter N. So the first number that we have is that one, which is 465. But the question is, can we find this respondent in a list? Our list ends on 10,000. So we are looking for someone who appears to be number 46,000. So these respondents will not be in the list. So we won't select that respondents. So I'm just going to indicate here so that you understand as well. That number that we have here is not on the list. Because our list ends on 1,000. That you remember. 1 to 10,000. That is our list. Those are the numbers that we're gonna find them. So we won't find person number 46,000 if we look into our Excel spreadsheet or that file that they provided with us. So this you won't indicate obviously in your steps, but I'm just indicating so that you understand. So the first person that we're gonna select in our list, basically, it will be the next number, which is person number 02509, which person is number 2509 on the list. Person number 50,000, we won't find him in our list because our list ends on 10,000. Number 63,000, we won't find him. The next one we will find as our respondent, and that becomes respondent number 2, and that respondents on the list will be 9,950. If we go back here, it ended here, so we must continue from the next row to select our respondents there. So if you continue with those numbers, you will see that after that number, it's supposed to be 2. So that's the next respondent. This respondents we won't find in the list because it's number 41,000. The next one, 41,000 is not on the list. 48,000 is also not on the list. We're using 5 digits. 31,000 is not on the list. 27,000 is not on the list. 26,000 is not on the list. 63,000 is also not on the list. So if you continue with the table to the next respondents, to continue search for the next respondents, you can, if it's printed this, you can easily use a circle or a highlighter to circle the numbers. It becomes much easier. 37,000 is also not on the list. 83,000 not on the list. 59,000, same story. 37,000 not on the list. So here we'll be continuing searching up until we find any other number using 5 numbers which is less than 10,000. So in this case, we could only find these 2 in a list that is provided. So obviously the table, if it was continuing going down, we could find more respondents. So at the moment, you'll be able to only list the first 2 respondents instead of the first 5 because the others will not be appearing on the list unless those numbers we identified were less than 10,000. For example, if that number, it became 03, this number 03122, that person will be on the list because it will be 3,122. The reason why we couldn't find most of these respondents is because the number is 10,000. And if you are using 10,000, it means every number that you select here must be 0 point something, because as soon as it becomes 10,000, it becomes 1. So you won't find those people. The ones that we find starts with the number of 0 point something. You can see 0.2, which is 2,000, 0.9, which is 9,000. So we won't find these respondents in the current table of random numbers. But that table, obviously, if it's quite enough, like on page 227, you've got that table there, and then you will be able to continue and search for those respondents. And this is a step where you are done with simple random. So a simple random works like that. You just have to follow the steps that are given there and indicate practicality under each there. Okay, let's look at the second method that they have there. And that if we have a list, remember, if we have a list, we can use this method, which is simple random. The second method that they talk about in the PowerPoint slide is the systematic sampling. And we want to highlight as well in the textbook So that will be on the next page, page 228. You can highlight there in the systematic, and then they indicate the steps there. So we're going to quickly copy these steps and do them practically and answer the next question in our learning activity practically. If you are using a systematic sampling process, the first step is to calculate the sample interval, and you've got the formula there, which is population divided by sample, and then you've got those abbreviations. So if you continue here, we know our population. Let's read the question again. That will be question 1.2. 10,000. And reading the case study, we must interview 500. So our population, people that qualifies, and we have them in the list, they are 10,000. We must only interview 500 of that 10,000. And that gives us a sample interval of 20, I think, but it's always good to use a calculator, even if it seems like a number that you can guess it easily. You don't want to make a lot of mistakes based on such careless mistake. So 10,000 divided by 500, that is 20. So our sample interval is 20. You get marks for that. You continue to the next step. Determine the starting value. This information will always be given in the question. So you look into the question that they ask you, what is the starting value there? And looking into this exercise, let's quickly look into the starting value, step number 2. Just gonna make it one sentence so you can see the whole screen while we continue. So you provide the one that is given, or it was instructed you to be a starting value. So in this case, you will see that it was indicated that the starting value within the sample interval is number 12 on the list. Remember, with systematic as well as with simple random, will always give you the starting point as your instructions. So in this case, it was given, you just have to indicate is number 12 in the list. So now we can select the respondents based on this information. The first respondent is always the starting value, so which is equals to number 12. Person that appears to be number 12 in our list, we will first call that person and say you are invited to participate in a survey. So in our Excel spreadsheet, we look for number 12, we look at the contact details, and it becomes our first person. The second respondent equals to first respondents plus sample interval, which is the formula that we are using. And you will see that formula translates to actually first respondent was number 12 plus the sample interval which we've calculated, which is 20 there. And that becomes the next person we're going to interview becomes the one which is number 32 on the list. And we continue the process. The third respondent is a previous. So it's always about previous respondents selected. So in this case, the previous respondent selected was number 32. So we're simply gonna say 32 plus 20. We always use 20. Don't make a careless mistake here and you add 12. I've seen students using this number 12 and they add it here and then it changes the answers. And that should give us 52. One who's appearing number 52 on the list. From here, you can continue all the way up until you reach 500 respondents that will be selected and will be invited to participate. So the next one will be for the respondent. And that fourth respondent is always previous respondent that was selected. So I'm going to remove that instruction. And the previous one in this case was 52. So we always add the sample interval. So it will be 52 plus 20. And the person who appears number 72 on the list is the next one. And the last one, which is the fifth respondents, because they said we should select the first 5, it will be 72 plus 20. And that goes to 92. And that's how the systematic process works. But for you to select these respondents, you're going to need the list. So going back to our case studies and practicality, we're going to stick to the instruction that was given to us, which indicate that you need to interview students face-to-face by visiting them at various institutions, as no list of contact details was provided. So in this case, they said we don't have a list, and that's why we use non-probability. So here we must select the method. If they provided us with the list like question 5.2 and 5.3, then at least we will have a chance to look into that list and say this list is having groups or inside is categorized, then let's use cluster, or is not, let's use simple random and so on. So let's look into non-sampling, non-probability sampling methods. Remember the ones that we look into now were the probability sampling, meaning that respondents had an equal chance. What happens when the respondents don't have an equal chance? So these are defined or explained previously on this page. Convenience, judgment. Remember, we won't have a list, so I will quickly explain this and which method you should choose based on their definitions. Okay. The first one is convenience. Convenience, like it says on page 222. In convenience sampling, the sampling you also want to highlight there. The sampling is drawn from a section of a population that is readily accessible or available to the researcher. So convenience is about the researcher that this is convenient to me. It's easy, in other words, it's possible, it's faster, and so on. If I have to make a practical example here, if I was conducting a research for multi-choice, because I'm a lecturer and I work at TUT as an institution, I've got access to students. It will be easy for me to conduct this research by actually interviewing my students or interviewing my colleague and interviewing TUT students because I have access there rather than going to UP. So convenience is about actually collecting the data quickly, easier, and so on. Judgment sampling, which is the next one. When you use judgment sampling, you wanna actually judge the respondents, like it says on page 222. You wanna highlight the second, the last paragraph there. In judgment sampling, the sample elements are selected subjectively or deliberately by the researcher. For example, if I'm looking for a specific person, females, athletes, I'm using my own judgment, or to say this person looks like a business professional and so on, that will be a judgment sampling. Snowball on page 223. You want to highlight where it says in that first sentence of snowball, it says snowball sampling is a method of judgment which is used when sample of special population is needed. That is when you have a special population or people who live with, who have certain special characteristics are needed, then you can use a snowball. But let me explain how does snowball work. If you understand the meaning of the word snowball effect, how does it work? Is that in a snow, if you build a small ball, with the snow. It tends to grow because as you roll or it rolls itself, it can roll down and then it collects other snow, it becomes bigger. That's the meaning of the snowball effect. So in research, if we are looking for people with special characteristics, let's say we want to interview people coming from poor families or disadvantaged background, we don't know those people. Or we want to interview students living with disabilities, we don't know those students. We can use the snowball because snowball, it simply means the person that you interview, you find the first person. Once you find the first person, the person recommends their friends, he recommends another person. So in other words, I will interview the first person and say, do you know another person living with disabilities that I can interview? In most of the time, they know each other, they are friends with each other, so they will be able to refer us to those other special people. So it could be any special characteristics. It could be athletes. Those are special characteristics that we're looking for. Athletes will refer us. So that's how the snowball effect works. And you can see they don't have an equal chance because I can refer my friend and not refer my colleague, but both of them qualify. It's about the reference. So the snowball, the more we interview, the more we get more recommendations. Last one is quota sampling, which you should highlight on the next page there. You want to highlight that first sentence there where it says the researcher classified the population to relevant characteristics such as age, sex, income, geographic area. So if respondents are selected based on these characteristics, for example, we're looking for people who are 18 years old, we're looking for only females, we are using a quota sampling. We must reach a certain quota, which means we are only meeting a certain criteria. So in summary, convenience is based on ease of collecting data. Judgment is based on who I'm looking at and whether they qualify. On my own judgment, snowball is other respondents selecting or suggesting, recommending other respondents, and quota is whether they qualify on demographics. So in this case, if you read the case study, you will see it was suggested that you use a sampling method that will save traveling cost, collect data quickly, allow you to draw a sample from accessible respondents. So you will see that sentence, it relates to convenience sampling because convenience is about easy, it's about quickly. So we will write that. Convenience sampling method, because you must indicate which method you're gonna use as part of non-probability. Motivate your answer. It was given in the case study that we should use a method that will collect the data quickly. Okay, I'm aware of the time here and I'm gonna quickly complete the chapter instead of redoing the chapter next time. So if you'll bear with me, I'm gonna quickly go to the next steps. They are quick and short. And then step 4, you will see that on step 4, we must select the sampling method, the sample size, sorry. And this is only one mark. Determine the sample size. You will see on the next page, I want you to also highlight how do you determine the sample size? How many interviewers or respondents you should interview? If the case study does not give you the number, you should determine them. So you want to highlight on page 236. There are two methods of determining a sample size. You want to write with a pen or a pencil there. Where it says blind guessing, blind guesses, just write there, not recommended. With a pen or a pencil, we don't recommend you to use a blind guess. For example, to just think, I want to interview 100 people is a blind guess. I will interview 1,000 people. You must always use a statistical method. You can write recommended where it says statistical method on page 236 at the bottom of the page there. Luckily enough, I'm not going to take you back to stats, how you use a statistical method. I just want you to know that statistical method is recommended. So we're not going to go through into details how you select those p-values and the sample size based on those numbers and the z-values. So practically, the question here is for 1 mark. You simply indicate the sample size. So doing it practically, I will say step 4, determine sample size. And I just indicate my sample size. Remember, it's always given in the case study. They always tell us how many people we should interview. So we're gonna take that number of people. So in this case, it was 500, like it's indicated here. 500 students should be interviewed. So we can put that here as our sample size. Okay, the last step, which is step 6. It's on the next page. So if you look, page 241, selecting the sample elements. I've seen a lot of students losing marks here, so you might be a bit tired now, but try and use that last energy to concentrate here, because this is where most students lose marks, and I want you to understand clearly what you need to do here. The textbook does not provide you a clear picture as well, but it does give you some sort of guidelines. So you want to highlight that first sentence on page 241 on top there. It says these steps involve selecting respondents, clear guidelines and procedures for selection of actual respondents should be included in the data collection phase. So the first step here is relating to a specific unit. So here we need guidelines on 2 things basically, which comes from that page. It says we must provide clear guidelines and procedures of how we're going to collect data. So it's got 2 steps. I'm going to include that. The first one, we're going to say data collection method. That is a clear guideline how we're going to collect data. So in this case, it was personal interviews. If it's telephone interviews, we'll write telephone interviews, depending. Mail surveys, in-depth interviews. So you start with the data collection method. The second thing is at the bottom of page 241, just before that summary box there, where it says gather data from designated elements. And you will see there, you also want to highlight the first sentence. They say a number of things can go wrong at this stage. So measures must be put in place to minimize or eliminate potential problems. Please highlight that sentence. Page 241. In the paragraph, gathering data from designated elements, the second sentence, a number of things can go wrong at this stage, so measures must be put in place to minimize or eliminate potential problems. You must indicate any problems that you foresee and what measures are you going to take to eliminate those errors. So first of all, we're going to indicate here potential error. Remember, we are using generic errors of personal interviews. What could go wrong if we conduct personal interviews? We are interviewing students at campus. We must meet them face to face. Think out of the box. It could rain, could be too hot, they could refuse to participate, they could give us wrong information, there could be a strike, any potential error. You indicate it here. That could happen during data collection. So let's take, for example, something such as it might be too hot. which might cause anxiety for respondents or discomfort. And then we provide a suggestion to that. Suggestion to eliminate or to minimize potential error. If it's too hot, let's say interviewers will bring umbrellas, for example. It's all about a matter of you have foreseen this situation, and then these interviewers are not clueless. It's not like they don't know what to do. So you provide a suggestion. So interviewer will bring an umbrella, or for example, interviews will be conducted in class to avoid that. If you have another error, this could be something such as strike, then we reschedule to visit campus, or if it's raining, it could be similar to the ones that are provided. If they refuse to participate, maybe we can provide incentives such as airtimes. So you just indicate the error as well as the suggestion. And you will see that brings us to the end of the chapter, 5 steps of the sampling process. So now, in concluding of the class, we will be doing a quizzes learning session so that you can do some reflection to see if you can understand a short multiple choice answer questions. It's just 10 questions, giving you 1 minute each question. We've played quizzes before, so you're familiar with the instructions. So you can log into the quizzes.com on your device. I want to indicate that this quizzes is based on case study number 2, which is Blue Connect, which is question number 2 there. So you also wanna just quickly read the case study Blue Connect. It's just 2 paragraphs while you are logging in. It's about a new mobile operator. Just read about the respondents, about data collection, or anything that is part of the sampling plan, because your quizzes is based on the sampling plan. So I'll be generating a code, and then you log in using that code, and then we can play the game, and then we can quickly discuss feedback to see if you are struggling with any certain aspects of this chapter. If you have any questions, ladies and gentlemen, now it's a good time to ask those questions while we are logging in. So I'm gonna make it a live game or a live session, which means it will end at the same time. So it will give you about 60 seconds for each question. So try and use the whole time. Think about those answers to that question. Don't answer it randomly, because this has a lot of component in your reflective and your revision part and understanding. So you can also open the case study somewhere, open the PowerPoint slides somewhere, open the textbooks, just to quickly reference while you're answering the questions. Use any nickname to join there. So we've got those instructions, you've got your game code there. So I'm gonna start the game either way. So as soon as you have a participant joining, I'll start the game. Anyone who's ready to start can start the game. So it's about 10 questions, which is 10 minutes. Right now it is 42 minutes after 2 o'clock, which gives us 18 minutes to 3. So for 10 minutes, so I will mute myself once again so that you can concentrate. I'm gonna quickly paste those instructions in this chat box so you can reference the game code there. So we will end the game at 8 minutes to and quickly discuss feedback. Okay, the instructions are on the chat box. I'll be sharing the screen of the leaderboard. So while you're answering the questions, try and have a glance at the leaderboard score so that you see how you're doing with your answers and if you are getting them correctly and what is your score in the leaderboard. I'll mute myself this side so that you can concentrate on those questions. So good luck. I'll also be here if you have any questions.
Jan.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I believe you're done playing the quiz. So I'm gonna end the quiz now so that we can generate the report. Looking at the short accuracy, it's a bit low, so there's a lot of questions you struggled with. But I see that although you struggled with some questions, some of you got them correct. So firstly, congratulations to XY for maintaining a first position there. I see question 8, 100% short accuracy. That's the one you got most of the correct answers to that question. The lowest that we have here is 20%, and it's among many questions. So if we quickly go to question 1 with the 20% and just quickly look there so that I can provide you with feedback, you don't make the same mistake. In this case, you were asked to actually develop a sampling plan for Blue Connect. And then the question that was asked there was, you must indicate the sample unit. Remember, the sample unit is where are we going to find the respondents, not who. Unit is where. So in this case, the correct answer was that we've got a list containing file record. So we're gonna find those respondents in that file record. Our sample unit is our list, is our sampling frame, because we're not gonna do personal interviews, we're gonna call them. So where are we going to find their contact details? In that file record? That was the correct answer. Most of you chose 100 customers to be interviewed. That is not the sample unit. That is the sample size. Remember, sample unit is always where are we going to find them. Sample element is who are we going to interview. The case study it said we should interview household purchase decision makers. That was the correct answer, such as parents. The extent of the population, that one got mostly correct. The geographic area, it was said city of Tshwane. Sample size, you got it correct, most of you, but some of you chose 800. Be careful. Sample size is the number of people who are we going to interview, not everyone who qualifies. So everyone who is in the list is 800, but they said we should only interview 100 customers. So 100 customers was our sample size in this case. Those are the ones that we're going to interview. Just to reference the case study, it comes from this sentence: during a briefing session, the company instructed you to interview only 100 customers, although it provided you with a list containing 800 customers. So this is our sample unit, and then from this 800, we will be selecting 100 customers. So that's what it meant there. 80% accuracy, that's good. 20% accuracy, develop a sampling plan by selecting a sampling method. So in this case, they said the list was provided, which means we have a file record. Hence, we should use a systematic or simple random, like we've used those numbers there or those calculations. We cannot use convenience because these are non-probability. We cannot use snowball, it's non-probability. So we must choose a probability method there. It's not cluster because they are not into groups. The data collection method, 60% accuracy, that is good. 100% accuracy. Okay, so this was about you providing a suggestion how we can eliminate an error whereby respondents don't answer their call. For example, here, one of you provided that we can use a snowball, and then they refer us to another person providing us with a person. That was a good suggestion. I like that suggestion. And then there was another suggestion, offer something to reward participant, but now it means you'll have to offer them via SMS because they are not picking up their calls. It's also another suggestion. Maybe provide them SMS, complete this survey, get a certain number of data, and then they will answer a call. So any suggestion that will lead to them picking up the phone, it's relevant. Or you can make a simple one, such as call at a different time. And then 20% short accuracy. Here you are supposed to actually select the first 3 respondents using a systematic. Remember, a systematic is the one where you calculate the sample interval first. So we're given a starting point, which is number 12. All your answers start with number 12. So for us to calculate the sample interval, in this case, it was 800, which is population, divided by sample, which is 100, and that gives us 8. So the correct answer will be respondents number 12. The second one will be 12 plus 8, which is a sample interval, becomes number 20. The next respondent is 20 plus 8, which is sample interval, which is 28. Hence, that was the correct answer. And the last question, you had to select the respondents using a systematic, a simple random instead, sorry, simple random process. So we already know that our list contains 800 and 800 has 3 digits. So therefore we'll be focusing on 3 digits to select the respondents. Our starting point is set first digits in the second row. So if you look at those numbers, this is the second row, first digit, it will be this one. So respondents number 241 is the first respondents, like you see there, followed by the next one, 302, because 302 is also on the list. The next one, 483, is also on the list. So hence this answer was correct. Respondents number 903 will not be on the list, so we're going to skip that number and take the next respondents to be 122 on the list. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our learning session for today. So please comment with your mood in the chat box before you leave, and just indicate your current mood. If you are happy, show a smiley face. I will keep this recording and put it on YouTube so that you can revisit it again for you to learn more and reflect on this chapter. It's been fun and I hope you enjoyed the class. Have a lovely week, ladies and gentlemen. Goodbye.